A round of applause for Gunnar Hellekson.
All right, that was great. Thanks, Allison. Good morning, everybody. Come on. Good morning. There we go. All right. Okay, so I think I'm the last guy who's going to talk to you about the government at this conference. Everyone has mentioned this memo. This is the open government memo the Obama administration put out at about like 12:01 a.m. after the inauguration. I've highlighted the three major principles. This is kind of the first paragraph of the memo. Transparency, participation, collaboration. Okay? These are kind of core principles in the open source community. It should kind of make sense to you. If you haven't read the entire memo, I encourage you to do that. It's actually kind of interesting. The subtext of the memo is we're trying. Please help us. Clay has talked to you about ways in which you can help out his transparency effort, and that's one way to help the government. But in doing that, in telling that story, and in the way that Tim told the story, I think there's a subtext there of this, there's a conflict, right? Like the government is something bad, and the government is something evil or incompetent, and now we, the open source community, have to come in and fix it, right? We have to come in and help them fix it. Truth is, the government is not the government. The government is made of people, right? It's individuals. Some of whom are doing a great job, some of whom are not doing a great job. But in large part, the government is made of smart people. And those smart people need our help. So we can do more when we work together, right? If the citizen army of the open source community can actually start engaging the federal, state, and local governments, help them do their work better, help them do their work more efficiently, everyone benefits. So what I'm going to do now is tell you a few stories about where this has already happened, where open source has already been used successfully in the government, and hopefully introduce you to some individuals who have done some really outstanding work in helping the adoption of open source. And I want to be specific here. I'm not talking about the government using open source software. The government uses open source software all day long. The government is a huge consumer of open source software. What I think is most interesting is when the government actually gets involved in the open source community and when the government actually adopts open source principles in doing its work. So what can we do together? The first thing we can do is make markets, right? Open source software is a great way to facilitate the creation of durable and efficient markets. Here's one example from Frederick Johnson from the Department of Energy. This is from 2004. This is a while ago. He put out a grant for some large-scale computing systems and explicitly said that the software developed as part of this grant should be licensed under the most permissive open source license, most permissive license available. That's kind of remarkable. And the reason why he's doing it, he says right here, is so that he can share it with everyone else, so that everyone can benefit from the work. I think the world would be a much better place if the government did this on a very regular basis. NASA has a great program called the CoLab, and this is an explicit way of reaching out to developers and scientists and researchers and getting them to get NASA soliciting their help, right? And everyone works together. And this is kind of outside of procurement, right? This isn't like a grant-making organization. This is creating an actual community. I think it's a fantastic idea. The U.S. Navy. I don't know how many people know this. The U.S. Navy, every ship in the Navy is a floating data center, right? They've got mail servers, they've got databases, they've got all that stuff, but they also have guns, right? They have radars, and all that stuff, all that command and control stuff needs a real-time system platform to run on top of. Now, the Navy didn't want to buy one data center for all the regular computing and one data center for the real-time computing, and so they worked together with IBM and Raytheon and Red Hat, and we all got together and started adding determinism to the Linux kernel. And most importantly, took all that work and moved it upstream. Kind of remarkable, right? And so now that a lot of that real-time work is being pushed out into Wall Street, right? Wall Street also has real-time needs. Medical applications, right? So again, creating markets. This is a great story. The National Consortium of Offender Management Systems. In other words, prisons, right? Prisons are hotels. Hotels where there are bars and locks everywhere, right? Hotels you can't leave. Okay, what that means is that when you're running a prison, you need an ERP system to keep track of everything. right? And that includes hospitals. That includes it's a restaurant, it's a hospital, it's a daycare center, right? So you need software to keep track of all that stuff. Turns out every prison is run more or less the same. So why are we writing 50 different state prison systems? Why can't we get together and work it? So there are about a dozen states have built their prison ERP system on NCOMs. So what's another thing we can do? We can start failing faster, right? This is like a standard open source mantra, right? Just fail faster, fail forward. This diagram is the Army program, the Future Combat Systems. Future Combat Systems, in short, is Skynet. The idea is to create a system of standards, software, services, hardware, whatever, have everything completely automated, right? So unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned ground vehicles, system sensors, satellites, the whole shoot match. This was a $200 billion program. It was a staggering amount of money. Guess what? They canceled it. First thing you're going to say is, well, yeah, $200 billion, they definitely should have used open source, right? They were spending way too much money on proprietary software. Joke is they did. Actually, the entire system platform for future combat systems was built on open source software, right? So open source software is not a panacea, right? There was something else going on. $200 billion. So why? What was broken? It was an acquisition fail, right? They had a big idea. They had an RFP that was this big and tried to deliver it all at once. And guess what? It didn't work. The reason why they were so careful about it, the reason why they spent so much money, is because they were afraid to fail. They needed a big idea. They sold Congress on a big idea, and they tried to deliver it all at once, and they had to spend a lot of money to make sure that when it was delivered, it was perfect. Now, every single one of you knows that that will never actually work, right? That's a terrible strategy for a large-scale program. So Sue Payton here, who's the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Advanced Systems and Concepts, she had a really good idea. She said, well, wait a minute, why are we doing all of these huge programs? Why are we doing these massive programs? Look at over here in the commercial world. They're using open source software, and they're using open standards, and they're iterating quickly, and they're actually getting the job done a lot better than we are. Why can't we adopt those principles internally? So she published the Open Technology Development Roadmap, which is a great paper on how, first of all, the problems that the government faces in the acquisition process and how they can use basically open source principles in order to improve the development of software and the development of technology inside the DoD. It's fascinating. Tim Harp, who's less fuzzy in person, if you check out his title, he's the Acting Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary for Command, Control, Computers, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance and Information Technology Acquisition. Wow. He must be really important. Have a title that long. Anyway, Tim put up this, when Tim recently came into his job, and he was being interviewed by the internal DoD press, and in this interview, he said, smaller programs are more successful. We can compete with industry delivering programs of 75,000 lines of code or less. But even industry can't deliver when it's millions of lines of code. And so he's now advocating, again, going back to the Open Technology Development Roadmap that Sue Payton laid out just a few years ago, he's saying, we're going to change the acquisition process in the Obama administration. We're going to do a small modular approach, right? That's open source. That's what he's talking about. Failing faster. Okay, so what are the other things that we can do together? Okay, we can keep things open. Every single one of you knows about the voting machine problem, right? Every single one of you, I think, understands why voting machines should be open source voting machines, right? We need to, just for citizens to be able to trust the machines that the government is giving them, they need to be able to see the code, they need to verify that it's working properly, right? This applies elsewhere as well. In the ERA bill, right, all that recovery money, there was money set aside for urban metering, transportation systems. So the idea is basically tracking where people are going inside a city and then billing them based on where they've traveled and how long they've traveled. Okay, good idea from an economics point of view, good idea from a traffic control point of view, a terrifying idea from a privacy point of view. Okay, the software that runs a system like that should not be delivered in one chunk by a system integrator. That needs to be open source software so that, if for no other reason, so that the city who's using the software can actually fire the person who implemented the system, right? I want the software here, I'm going to fire this guy, and I'm going to bring somebody else in to run it and maintain it. It's important to have open systems when we have infrastructure, and open source software is one of the only ways of doing that. This is my favorite story, actually, because it's a friend of mine. The other thing we can do is enable government workers to solve their own problems. This is Martin Stadler, First Sergeant Martin Stadler. He's been in the National Guard for years. He's been in almost every major military action that the United States has been in the last, say, 20 years. He recently spent 14 months in Iraq, and when he got there, he didn't have anything. Right? It's a cliche almost that the government will send the army out somewhere and not give them the tools that they need. Right? So there's a culture of improvising. Right? You make do with what you have. So this is a photo of two of his guys in a watchtower. They were stationed at a base near Iran. The base is about 24 square kilometers. Right? It's huge. The gate to enter the base was 5 football fields wide. So they set up watchtowers at intervals around the perimeter of the base. The watchtowers, though, they didn't have enough material to actually build a tower. So they reappropriated some large concrete water pipes and stood them up on end and then built shacks on top, right? It was great kind of improvisation. So these guys are up here. The problem is the base is too big, and the regular tactical radios that the Army has wouldn't reach the center of the base. The base was too big. So they had to play a game of telephone where one guy would get on the radio and called in the guy in the next tower, and then the guy in the next tower, and eventually they got in range of the base, and then they could get the message over. Okay, that doesn't work, right? That's a terrible idea. So Martin happens to work for Red Hat, and knows how to use open source software. Also knows how to hack some hardware. And so this is a Wi-Fi access point in an ammo can. This is all hardware that was begged, borrowed, stolen, literally pulled out of the trash. So what he was able to do is set up basically a Pringle can Wi-Fi network between all the towers, installed Asterisk on a laptop he pulled out of the trash, and actually set up a VoIP system between all the towers. Yeah, that's exactly right. So the terrible thing about this is that if Martin had gone through the regular chain of command, right, and had actually ordered this, said, hey, I need a bigger tactical radio, it would have taken 6 months. They probably would have spent $2 million, $3 million, I don't know how much, millions of dollars building a new tactical radio. And Martin would have had that radio delivered. He would have already been gone. It would have been his tour would be over. Instead, he was able to make do with what he had. And the only reason he was able to make do with what he had is because he has open source software available to him. We need to be encouraging more of this. Okay, so what's the takeaway? First thing I want you to remember is that the government is made of people. And when you find someone who is doing good work, you need to reward them. We need to be talking about it. We need to be telling these stories. We need to hold these successes up. Let people know that the government people, they're not lazy and they're not stupid. They're just constrained by a broken system. And so when they succeed, we need to reward them. The other thing is we need to let them fail. We can't expect the government to deliver perfectly every time. Tim talked about the government as a vending machine, and when it doesn't do what you want, you kick it. It's broken. That's not fair, right? We need to be able to let these people fail as long as they're small failures, right? If somebody has a clever idea, they should be able to go and give them $1 million. Like, give them $1 million to go try that idea out. And if it doesn't work, oh well, at least now we know it doesn't work. It can't be that every time a program in the government fails or goes off the rails or goes over budget, that it ends up on the front page of the Washington Post. It's a bad set of incentives. We're all in this together, and we should be helping each other. So this is why we founded Open Source for America, right? Open Source for America is as much about encouraging the government to use open source software as it is to get the government involved in open source communities, right? To ease the adoption of open source. Once the government is able to collaborate with the private sector through the use of open source software, like in the NASA Collab program or in NCOMS, we are going to be much, much more powerful, more agile, and we will have a better running government. Thank you.